time that has looked out from behind the clouds. Shameful death awaits thee, strangled by a black albasta, or betrayed by corrupt friends, with your skull cracked open, you shall perish. The Crusade found its target and came home to roost, as if his death was foretold. Chapter 1. Sworn Friends. Napoleon in Kostanay. There is nothing strange about it. According to one version, the French ruler was not unfamiliar with Kazakhstan. It was a secret project shared by two emperors, Napoleon and Paul I. It was part of the joint campaign known as the Crusade to India, something like a transit military base. Anyway, everything coincides: the time, political alignment, interests of Russian government and local nobility. The project received funding and land. A Khan was appointed. He had long asked for permission to migrate in that area. Resettlement of the people began, and the Bukey Horde was formed. The idea was to create a buffer state between the Urals and the Volga, an exemplary Khanate which would set an example for the rest of Kazakhstan. Napoleon's plans and the story of one friendship, a herdsman's son and the son of the Khan. They were together since childhood. Poet Mohammed Utemiz ibn Zhangir, the second and last Khan of the Bukey Horde. Zhangir spoke several languages. He was fond of numismatics, billiards, admired music and poetry, in particular the poetry of his friend Mohammed, progressive governor of a progressive project. It was an agrarian society. It had its own foundations, traditions, principles and guidelines, not only for living, but for survival and life activities as well. Of course, in this regard, the society was in great need of Zhangir's innovative ideas. Still, his ideas were well ahead of their time. Schools, museums, archives and fairs, all of it appeared in the Bukey Horde at the time of Zhangir's rule. It is noteworthy that the Khan, in order to set an example to his subjects, was the first person to administer smallpox vaccine to his sons. Of course, he had to overcome opposition and endure the lack of understanding on the part of his subjects. A lot of persuasion was required. Needless to say, people were persuaded in different ways. Whippings were a commonplace occurrence. Even though Mohammed had not received as advanced an education as Zhangir, he was also a very progressive man. He spoke Tatar, Russian and Arabic fluently. There is information that indicates that Mohammed met with Pushkin when the latter was traveling in the steppes, collecting material on Pugachev's rebellion. The two men were introduced by Dal. Mohammed and Dal also corresponded. Their letters have been preserved. One can't help but wonder what sort of things Pushkin and Mohammed might have discussed together. As a rule, Mohammed sat near Zhangir during all celebration parties and receptions. The Khan did not neglect his friend's counsel, and Mohammed's yacht, arranged with special privileges, always stood next to the Khan's. The ability to write poetry and captivate people with words is indeed a gift from God. According to legends, he was also a very determined person. At age 16, he was already famous. By the time he turned 19, he was regarded as the best singer of his clan. The Athens of the steppe were assigned special powers by the people. A man who can arrange words into a beautiful song on the fly is certainly special. With his words, he channeled the spirits of the ancestors. To kill an Akin who dared speak even the most unpleasant truths was a shameful deed. He was generous and cheerful. It is obvious that he was very uninhibited. I think Zhangir Khan may have also been quite secretive and canny. In 1827, Zhangir's cousin, Sultan Kaib Gali Ishimov, revolted. He believed he had more rights to the Khan's throne, and Mohammed sided with Kaib Gali. What caused this sudden act of rebellion still remains a mystery for many people. However, 8 years before that, Zhangir had put his friend in jail, having first asked permission of Nicola I. The alleged reason was that Mohammed was wreaking havoc among the people. Zhangir Khan appropriated 400 acres of land to himself and assigned several hundred acres to his relatives. They didn't just appropriate the land, they had obtained permission from St. Petersburg first, but the nation perceived it as a seizure. Friendship is friendship, but land and politics are land and politics. They say that there may have been romantic feelings and possibly even an affair between Zhangir's wife Fatima and Mahambet. Chapter 2: Fatal Passion, National Liberation Movement. I wanted to take your Hanums and wed them by force. O crowned Hans, take a Han's daughter that's fairer than Hanika, take without dowry, and make her squeal like a puppy. Fatima was his third and favorite wife. A Mufti's daughter, she spoke French, German and Russian. Educated in the Orenburg boarding school, she played the piano, danced remarkably well, led a very active social life and was what they now call a socialite. There's a photograph stored in the Cabinet of Curiosities. Presumably it is a photograph of Zhangir Khan and his wife Fatima. This photo was listed as a portrait of a married couple. It would be fair to say that this is one of the earliest photographs, not only in our collection but in the world, because it dates circa 1740. It was made in Astrakhan in the studio of photographer Vishnevsky. A passionate appreciator of fine art, Fatima was also keen on Mahambet's poetry. Was it only admiration of his literary prowess or something far more personal? It remains a mystery. It could have been wishful thinking on the part of Mahambet, or an intrigue initiated by Fatima in order to sow discord in the men's friendship, or a part of someone's devised plans. Who knows? According to a legend, when Zhangir tried to speak on this delicate subject, Mahambet became so enraged that he kicked at the threshold of the yurt and stormed out. In one poem, Mahambet wrote that he was insulted by what Zhangir Khan seemed to imply. Nishimov's revolt, which Mahambet had joined, was defeated. The latter was arrested and sent to prison. During the cholera epidemic, Mahambet managed to escape. Oddly enough, he came to the Khan for help. Zhangir pardoned him. Moreover, he entrusted Mahambet with the upbringing of his sons. But the Khan kept his distance from the poet from that day forward. He sent him to Orenburg, where Zhangir's children were studying at the cadet corps. Zhangir Khan awarded Mahambet Utamis the title of sergeant. It was not something that could be done lightly. But by 1835 they had become enemies. How did that happen? Zatai Taimanov had also been treated kindly by the Khan in the past, but in 1836 he headed another rebellion against Zhangir. Isatai was offended by the fact that he was not appointed foreman of the Caspian littoral Kazakhs. There is no peace. All the beatings administered by the beys and the elders, they beat and torture us, and if we dare resist them, they drag us to the Khan, who then proceeds to make cruel punishments. When sultans pass by, they stop in our halls, take our wives and daughters against their will, rob us of our property. Zhangir Khan did not heed the voice of the elders. He created a Bey council of 13 people from which they were excluded. He established the Khan's council, and they were barred from its activities as well. It is possible that they felt left out. You're not a governor, the source of all troubles, filled to the brim with coiling snakes. You're not a governor, scorpion, the drain of lowly duplicity. Mahambet became the spiritual leader of the uprising. His poems got distributed instantly. It was another blow to Zhangir, and the Khan, condemned by the poet, condescended to reply, "Hey Mahambet, for many years we have lived in equality and harmony, and now you're cursing me and my ancestors behind my back. Remember the time when your father appeared before the bouquet, his neck outstretched, starving and teeming with lice the size of sparrows? Who gave him the cattle? Who elevated him above others? Isatai's father or Bukey Khan? Could it be that you have lost your memory? My seniority is of benefit for Isatai and yourself as well. If each of you supported me, it would have been a fine example to others, and now there's only fire ahead of me, and naught but abyss lies behind." In 1938, the rebels were defeated by troops of the Russian army. Isatai Taimanov was killed. He was a very trusting person. They could have easily seized the Khan, but Zhangir said, "Give us 10 days to pack up and leave." And Isatai waited, and in these 10 days they brought cannons and shot them. They say that the Han suffered of what transpired until his death, but what's done is done. Chapter 3. The Curse. Zhangir, son of Bukey, died in August 1845. He was a little over 40. The Han's death caused numerous speculations and theories. Zhangir Han was quite healthy. On the day of his passing, he drank a cup of kumis and felt unwell. He lay down. Sometime later, his servant found him dead. It was rumored that the Han was poisoned. By the end of his life, Zhangir had amassed a large number of enemies, and his rule got in the way of many. Here are 3 versions of the Han's death, motivated by love, revenge, and politics. Version 1. Just before his death, the Han had married a 4th time. His bride was a beautiful girl. Fatima took Zhangir's new marriage as a betrayal. The new Hanum is 14 years old, and many people say that she's beautiful. Fatima is 30 years old. She resents her husband's new marriage. It is understood by the people as a sign of the Han's diminished interest in Fatima. It's all these Kyrgyz women seem to talk about from morning till dusk, each and every one of them. They all annoy her with questions. She really had a powerful influence not only the Han, but the whole ruling structure as well. It is assumed that Fatima could have poisoned Zhangir out of jealousy. There is another version. The killer was Mahomet Utemisev. He had many reasons to hate the Han and wish for his death. Presumably, his chief motivation was his love for Fatima and heartbreak over the death of his friend Isatai. But that weren't enough. When Mahomet lost the protection of the Han, he lost everything. Ostensibly, Mahomet hired a man to poison the Han. In theory, this version has the right to exist, but logically I believe it is to be false. And finally, the politics. On the occasion of the sudden death of Han Zhangir Bukey, who in his illness had put himself in the care of a Russian physician, the Horde members began to speculate whether the Russians could have murdered the Han. Having learned of Zhangir Han's death, Nikolai I asked me to convey my condolences to the bereaved family, but when it came to appointing a new Han to the throne, he declared that there cannot be another ruler in one state. The Bukey Horde was thus completely taken under the control of the Tsarist government. The document on the abolition of the Han's power had already been prepared. Generally speaking, the government had been so enamored of Zhangir's Eurasian charm, it is doubtful that any member of the emperor's court even remotely considered the idea of destroying him. In history, a ruler's death is always connected, however vaguely, with some external factors. He was either poisoned or strangled, but I think his was a natural death. To this day, none of the speculations have been confirmed by any documentary evidence, nor was the version of Napoleon's indirect involvement in the creation of the Bukey Horde. Mahomet outlived his friend, but not by much. The circumstances of his death remain a mystery as well. According to the version that I know, he was killed by his brother. When one's own brother decides to do something like that, the whole situation is crossed into the territory of Shakespearean drama. According to other sources, Mahomet was murdered by his friends during a party. The latter did not like the one of Mahomet's poems. He was a sultan, and the murder was allegedly ordered by the Tsarist government. One way or another, in October 1846, the poet's skull was crushed. He was beheaded in his own yurt, and then his head mysteriously disappeared. At that time, it was customary in the empire to reward such an act, and those who brought the heads of the rebels were rewarded. The poet's body was buried next to his aoul. It wasn't until some time later that his head was laid down in the grave. The identity of the person who did it remains unknown. In 1958, a burial site, presumably Mahomet's, was uncovered. The head was examined, and the image of the Rebellia Zakin was reconstructed. And one last thing, Fatima died soon after Zhangir. Sometime later, their demise was followed by the death of Fatima's rival, the 4th wife of the Han. The string of inexplicable events does not end here. Under mysterious circumstances, the heir to Zhangir's throne, Sahib, died soon after, followed by their daughter and 2 other sons. Talks of the curse persisted in the Bukey Horde for many years that followed. The time that has looked out from behind the clouds.